Rio Bravo wasn't just another dusty western riding into theaters in 1959. It was a defiant statement, a comeback, and a cultural challenge disguised as a shootout in a small frontier town. What looked like a simple showdown between John Wayne and a band of outlaws hid decades of drama, power struggles, and behind-the-scenes gambles that nearly broke the movie before it became a classic. Did you know this film was actually made to prove another Oscar-winning Western wrong? Today, we're counting down 25 secrets hidden for decades about Rio Bravo, and trust me, some of them will change how you watch it forever. The movie was born out of spite. This wasn't just a Western. It was Hollywood revenge. Director Howard Hawks and John Wayne were both infuriated by High Noon, 1952, a film that showed a sheriff begging townspeople for help while his community abandoned him. To Wayne and Hawks, this wasn't bravery, it was weakness. So they created Rio Bravo as the direct opposite. Sheriff John T. Chance doesn't plead. He doesn't chase townsfolk for support. He digs in with just a drunk, a kid, and an old crippled man. What audiences didn't realize was that every line, every beat, was a rebuke to High Noon. Hawks even admitted, "I didn't like the idea of a sheriff running around town asking for help." The result? A movie designed not just to entertain, but to redefine heroism on screen. Dean Martin's casting was a gamble. What fans never realized was that Dean Martin wasn't the obvious choice to play Dude, the deputy battling personal demons. At the time, Martin was known mainly as a singer, and for his comedy act with Jerry Lewis. Many critics thought putting him in a serious Western would collapse the film's credibility. But Hawks saw potential. He pushed Martin hard, making him rehearse breakdown scenes again and again until the crooner shed his nightclub persona. The payoff was enormous. Martin's portrayal of Dude's humiliation, shaking hands, and desperate fight for redemption became one of the film's most celebrated performances. It wasn't just casting against type. It was proof that Martin could act with raw grit, and he surprised everyone. Ricky Nelson was cast for teenagers. This wasn't just about star power. It was about ticket sales. By the late 1950s, Ricky Nelson was one of the biggest teen idols in America, thanks to the adventures of Ozzie and Harriet and his hit records. Hawks openly admitted Nelson was cast as Colorado to lure young audiences who normally wouldn't buy tickets to a John Wayne Western. Nelson brought a fresh face to the frontier, and his gunslinging poise balanced Martin's vulnerability. But there was more. Nelson also delivered one of the film's most iconic moments when he and Dean Martin performed "My Rifle, My Pony, and Me." That scene wasn't in the original script. It was added to showcase Nelson's voice. What audiences didn't know? The studio bet on Nelson to keep the box office alive, and it worked. The budget was surprisingly modest. For a film starring John Wayne, Dean Martin, and Ricky Nelson, you might assume Rio Bravo had a massive Hollywood budget behind it. But in reality, Warner Brothers gave Howard Hawks only about $1.75 million to work with. Even in 1959, that was on the lower side for a big studio Western. Hawks, however, saw it as a challenge. He believed great Westerns didn't depend on money. They depended on strong characters, tight staging, and chemistry. Sets were recycled from earlier Warner Brothers productions. Town facades were dressed up rather than rebuilt. And costumes were pulled from storage or reused from previous Wayne films. Even props were minimized. There are fewer horses, wagons, and large set pieces than in contemporaries like The Big Country. What audiences didn't realize was that this forced Hawks to double down on dialogue and tension rather than spectacle. Ironically, the modest budget preserved the intimacy of the story. Instead of wide-open plains, the action feels bottled, claustrophobic, and personal. And because Hawks kept costs low, the film turned into a profitable hit for Warner Brothers, proof that a movie didn't need sprawling sets or massive landscapes to become a timeless classic. Howard Hawks avoided wide shots. John Ford's Westerns were famous for sweeping panoramas of Monument Valley, framing cowboys as small figures against endless skies. Howard Hawks went the opposite route in Rio Bravo. He kept the camera close. He preferred tight two-shots, mid-shots, and confined framing that emphasized conversation, gestures, and the claustrophobic atmosphere of the jailhouse. Even the few outdoor scenes stick close to the dusty main street rather than exploding into the horizon. Critics at the time were divided. Some claimed Hawks had limited ambition compared to Ford, while others saw his choices as deliberate. Hawks himself explained that audiences connected more when they felt like they were in the room with the characters. What audiences didn't realize was that Hawks was reshaping the language of the Western. Instead of focusing on grandeur, he focused on people. The tension between Chance, Dude, Colorado, and Stumpy didn't need Monument Valley as a backdrop. It thrived in tight spaces where emotions clashed and every look mattered. Over time, this became one of the film's greatest strengths. Modern directors like Quentin Tarantino would later point to Hawks' approach as proof that suspense could thrive in small rooms, not just in wide-open plains. Dean Martin struggled with the saloon scene. One of the most haunting moments in Rio Bravo comes when Dude, at his lowest point, desperately fishes a coin out of a saloon spittoon. It's degrading, painful, and unforgettable. But behind the scenes, Dean Martin struggled with filming it. He told Hawks he wasn't sure he could stomach the humiliation, worried it might look either too comedic or too grotesque. Hawks insisted it was necessary. He told Martin that if he felt embarrassed, the audience would feel it too. So Martin threw himself into the scene, visibly uncomfortable. His hesitation and shame weren't faked. They were real, captured in real time. What audiences didn't realize was that Martin's personal discomfort became the heart of the performance. That moment of raw desperation made Dude's eventual recovery resonate even more powerfully. Hawks believed every character needed to hit bottom to earn redemption, and Martin's spittoon dive became that low point. Critics later praised it as one of the rawest depictions of addiction and humiliation in a Western. For Martin, it was also the scene that proved he could act far beyond his nightclub reputation, cementing his credibility as a dramatic performer. The film's pacing defied studio notes. At a time when studios demanded fast-paced action and short runtimes, Howard Hawks did the opposite. Rio Bravo runs 2 hours and 21 minutes, filled with long stretches of dialogue, slow-burn tension, and deliberate pauses. Warner Brothers executives worried audiences would grow restless, especially since rival westerns were emphasizing larger battles, faster cuts, and big outdoor action. Hawks ignored the notes. He believed suspense came not from constant gunfights, but from anticipation, character interplay, and small human conflicts. He famously said, "If you've got good characters, you don't need much story." What audiences didn't realize was that this pacing was Hawks' rebellion against studio formulas. The long conversations between Chance and Dude, the playful sparring with Feathers, even Stumpy's cranky interruptions, all of it gave the film its rhythm. Instead of rushing from shootout to shootout, Hawks allowed tension to simmer until the final showdown. While some 1959 critics called the film too slow, modern reappraisals recognize its pacing as masterful. Today, Rio Bravo is celebrated not for action overload, but for its patience, its confidence, and its trust that audiences would invest in the characters. Quentin Tarantino became its biggest champion. Few modern filmmakers have praised Rio Bravo as loudly or as often as Quentin Tarantino. He has repeatedly called it one of his favorite films, citing it as a direct influence on Reservoir Dogs, Jackie Brown, and The Hateful Eight. What Tarantino admired wasn't just the Western setting. It was the pacing, the dialogue, and the idea of characters trapped together under threat, forced to talk, argue, and bond while danger lurked outside. Hawks' use of enclosed spaces, from the jailhouse to the saloon, gave Tarantino a model for how to build suspense without constant movement. What audiences didn't realize was how much Rio Bravo shaped modern independent filmmaking. Tarantino often contrasted Hawks' work with films he disliked, praising Hawks' patience and his confidence in characters over spectacle. In interviews, he even suggested that one way to judge a film lover was to ask if they preferred Rio Bravo or High Noon. For Tarantino, loving Hawks's vision was proof of taste. Thanks to his championing, a new generation of cinephiles rediscovered Rio Bravo, cementing its reputation as not just a great Western, but one of the most influential American films of all time. The movie quietly sparked a trilogy. What fans didn't realize was that Rio Bravo wasn't just a one-off. It became the blueprint for two more Howard Hawks films, El Dorado, 1966, and Rio Lobo, 1970. Both featured John Wayne in nearly identical roles, a tough sheriff holding off outlaws with a ragtag team. Hawks himself admitted he was essentially remaking the same story, refining it each time. In El Dorado, Robert Mitchum took on the deputy battling personal demons role, echoing Dean Martin's Dude. By Rio Lobo, Wayne was older, but still embodying the sheriff archetype Hawks had perfected. Critics sometimes accused Hawks of repeating himself, but he saw it differently. He believed the formula was timeless. What audiences didn't know was that Hawks kept revisiting Rio Bravo because he saw it as the purest expression of his philosophy, friendship, loyalty, and holding the line against chaos. Hidden crew cameos populate the town. If you look closely at the saloon and street scenes, you'll notice something unusual. Many of the background extras weren't professional actors at all. They were Warner Brothers crew members. Hawks often pulled grips, set decorators, and even office staff onto the set to fill out the town. It was cheaper than hiring dozens of extras, and it gave Hawks control over their movements. What audiences didn't realize was that many of those anonymous townsfolk had day jobs behind the camera. A sound technician might be playing a card dealer. A set carpenter could be sitting at the bar. For Hawks, this added authenticity because these people already knew how the set worked. The result was a town that felt alive, even in its smallest details, populated by people who were part of the film's DNA. Hawks trusted character over action. In a time when Westerns often lived or died by how big their shootouts looked, Hawks dared to strip the formula down. Rio Bravo contains surprisingly few action scenes for a film over 2 hours long. Instead, the tension builds in conversations, pauses, and wary glances. Hawks trusted that audiences would lean into character drama more than spectacle. What audiences didn't realize was that Hawks was redefining the Western. Instead of epic cattle drives or massive showdowns, he offered quiet suspense, Chance waiting in the jailhouse, Dude wrestling with shame, Feathers challenging Chance's stubbornness. The eventual action hits harder precisely because Hawks makes you wait. His restraint reshaped expectations and showed that a Western could be gripping without being nonstop gunfire. Critics were divided at first. When Rio Bravo premiered in 1959, not everyone recognized its brilliance. Some critics called it slow, even indulgent, compared to faster, flashier Westerns of the era. Others complained that Wayne played the same role he always did, while Ricky Nelson was dismissed as stunt casting. But audiences disagreed. The movie earned strong box office returns, and word of mouth kept it alive long after its run. What audiences didn't realize was that time would transform its reputation. By the 1970s, critics like Pauline, Kyle, and Roger Ebert were hailing it as a masterpiece. The very things once seen as flaws, the slow burn, the intimacy, the focus on characters, became its greatest strengths. Today, Rio Bravo is often ranked among the top Westerns ever made, preserved as a national treasure. In 2014, the Library of Congress selected Rio Bravo for preservation in the National Film Registry. That honor is reserved for films deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. What audiences didn't know was how far the film had come, from a modestly budgeted studio Western to a piece of American heritage. Its inclusion cemented Hawks's vision as timeless, proof that a movie born out of a feud with High Noon had become a cinematic cornerstone. Every performance, every frame, every piece of dialogue is now officially recognized as part of America's cultural memory. It's the final twist. A movie once seen as a defiant rebuttal ended up standing tall as one of Hollywood's most enduring works. Rio Bravo wasn't just a Western. It was a battle cry, a reinvention, and a story that outlived its own time. What started as Howard Hawks and John Wayne's rebuttal to High Noon became one of the most influential films of the 20th century, inspiring directors for decades to come. But the real secret? It thrived not on spectacle, but on humanity, friendship, loyalty, and grit. Which of these 25 secrets surprised you most? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe for more hidden Hollywood stories, and remember, in Rio Bravo, as in life, sometimes the smallest team can hold the biggest line.